Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu. As of right now, the tentative date and time for that is going to be on Tuesday nights, usually at around 9:30 Eastern Standard Time as of right now. Subject to change, but fear not, because it's always going to be uploaded on YouTube under the channel of Zenitsu, as well as being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. So please feel free to leave a rating, like, follow, subscribe, review, whatever, depending on the social media platform the platform that you're listening on, to help support the podcast. Today, I am back with Jay Stewart, and the week has kind of been a little on the slow side when it comes to, actual developments in the game. Not that I'm running out of topics or anything, but I thought we would do something fun for a change and kind of just theorycraft a mechanic. The mechanic that I'm thinking about theorycrafting, because it's in a lot of other card games, and usually it's well hated and not very well liked, but card games do it anyway, because it introduces new design space, and that's going to be working around with an extra deck or EX deck. Just a side pool of cards that you could use mid-match, whatever you actually want to label that as. So that's going to be an interesting discussion on our thoughts on how Digimon could approach it, because each card game does it a little bit differently. But before we get into that, we kind of have news and announcements and the question of the week. So the question of the week is going to pertain to one of the big news bits. I guess I'm just going to spoil it right now. We got news for a new Digimon video game. So the question of the week is, what kind of TCG tie-in would you actually like to see for the new Digimon video game? So feel free to type your answers in the comments down below, or type them in the chat if you're listening to the live stream. But Jay Stewart, take it away. What kind of TCG tie-in would you like to see?
Yeah, so I played the first two Cyber Sleuth story games and everything. Personally loved the games, and one thing I do remember was there was a NPC that you could go to, and you could trade, because you could do gachapons in the game and get different, or even just doing missions and everything, and get Digimon cards, and you could trade them with him for other stuff, and even see the collection of the Digimon cards. Now, at the time of the Hacker's Memory and the Cyber Sleuth games, the official Digimon TCG wasn't out yet, so these were the old school EX1 looking arts and everything of the cards. So it'd be kind of cool to see them bring that back, but actually use the arts of the actual current TCG tie-in as well. And maybe some of what they could do is, maybe we could see Shoto in the game, hey, are you collecting Digimon cards? I could really use some, and everything. That'd be kind of cool to see.
That definitely would be interesting, but I'm thinking more of the reverse. Hey, I know there's going to be a new Digimon video game. What kind of cards would I like to see from the video game? Because we did the whole Survive stuff. Yeah.
You're talking about Digimon from the TCG into the game.
Yeah, cross-promotion. Because, I think what you were saying is also kind of neat and interesting, because that is probably something they could do. It literally wouldn't really cost them that much on the art perspective, because they already have all those art assets. So I think, having a, not really side game, like Gwent or anything, but that would be kind of cool if they did that. I think that would be too ambitious for them, and they definitely are not going to do it. But I think, at least for players of the video game, telling them that there is a Digimon TCG inside of the video game, not actually inside of the video game, but through the messaging of the video game, would be very interesting. And then vice versa, I would like to see, obviously, a promo card come with the video game. The way they handled Digimon Survive was absolutely abysmal. One, the game was mismarketed. Two, the cross-promotion was borderline non-existent. We got a couple of promos, but we got the promos so late that, one, they just functionally weren't relevant. There was some niche play over in Japan, but it was just so poorly done to advertise Survive that it blew my mind how poorly everything was mismanaged when it came to that. And like if they do it correctly, I think it would be a huge boon not only just for the card game but for the video game as well, because hey, if there's a promo inside of the box, cool, that drives Digimon TCG players to buy the video game. And in, like, because it's a stories game, they are usually like that's the better sub franchise to the Digimon video games. As you kind of said, Hacker's Memories and Cyber Sleuth were two of the biggest and best Digimon games out there outside of like World 1 and World 3. And then Dusk and Dawn, like those were arguably the most successful, but I think Dusk and Dawn was part of the stories franchise too. I don't know.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I digress. Um,
Well, if that's the case, if that's what you meant, like, we do know that BT22 is supposed to be the Digimon Hacker Memories / Cyber Sleuth kind of themed and everything, and that's supposed to be coming out in July-ish, give or take, if I remember correctly. So it'd be kind of cool if they maybe, because I'm trying to think, in BT5 we had like I'm trying to remember her name, Nico, the girl that practically gets Omnimon from the stories. Um, the main protagonist, the male version of him, and also the one that you play as, and also Otara, the Diaboromon guy. Like, we know that there was tamer cards for those in the main set, so maybe if the set comes out, I highly doubt they would include like the new what is it called? Time something? Like, it'd be
uh,
cool if like they just made a generic tamer, kind of like similar to how the I can't remember what his name is. It was the 2-cost white card
Takumi.
that you could Takumi, yeah, where practically you could just whenever you digivolve, you tap him to draw a card and everything. Like, just make a simple generic tamer like that with the new protagonist would be kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for how they want to do cross promotion, and like so that's the big thing. So the video game, in case anyone's lost, it's called Digimon Story Time Stranger. So that's the
Stranger,
if
that's
yes, it's going to be releasing in I believe late 2025. So we're going to be getting it like probably fall winter time area. Um and yeah, I think that there's a lot of room for cross promotion. And one thing that Pokemon does, and what's made Pokemon as successful as it is the mass multimedia marketing that they have done to be able to, you know, make the game feel very cohesive between all of the different mediums. So, like, the anime releases its TV show alongside the games, which release alongside of the card game, and everything is synced and cohesive to the point where it's just like, oh, I remember in, let's just say, the transition to Gen 2 from Pokemon, I wasn't getting Gen 3 cards because I'm sure there was like, they were working on Gen 3. So it's like, oh, Gen 2 released in video game, anime, and card form across the board, and that's what made Pokemon feel more cohesive. Digimon, obviously being controlled by Bandai, tends to mismarket and mismanage everything that they do. Digimon is definitely the biggest problem child when it comes to that because Bandai just, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to care. But hopefully they could do this opportunity to cross promote the game and the card game to do very well. Because I think like a little Gwent version of the Digimon card game inside of Time Stranger would be kind of fun. I'm not gonna lie. Usually those modes are very popular, and then vice versa. Give us promos that are actually promoting the video game on time would be preferred. So yeah, it's an interesting opportunity, nonetheless. So I guess we'll just dive right into the news. So kind of already alluding to it, surprise, there's going to be a new Digimon video game. It's going to be very interesting because it kind of gives off like Shin Megami Tensei vibes, which I'm totally down. It seems like it's definitely going to be a little bit on the darker side when it comes to their stories, or at least like this story more particularly. So from the trailer, if anyone wants, they could go on to YouTube and watch the trailer. It looks like there's going to be the Olympus 12 in it, so that's a lot of unexplored territory. We don't have that much background or lore or detail or anything including them, so it'll be nice to see those Digimon actually get some time to shine. If anyone's unfamiliar with Digimon lore, they are basically the guardians of the multiverse. So they're like the Royal Knights, but for the multiverse. Except they're weaker than the Royal Knights, but I digress.
They're Marvel's TVA practically.
Yes. So it'll be interesting to see what the game actually is like and what the story unfolds and how they're gonna promote and cross promote the game, both games. So
Yeah, I think something that was a little interesting for me was we didn't find out about this from Bandai at first. We found out about this from a PlayStation live stream, like revealing all their video games, and it just came out of the blue, out of nowhere, as far to my knowledge.
yeah,
Like
it
there
also
was
was
no,
leaked on GameStop from what I saw. Like they had postings up before the PlayStation, like PlayStation State of Play.
yeah, and then it kind of looks like it might be using the same mechanics as the Hacker's Memory and Cyber Sleuth was. So, like a 3v3 possible potential and everything. Because it even has like some of the like just the poster art that you see at the end of the trailer. Like you see the 3 starting Digimon that you could choose and everything, very similar to how that Cyber Sleuth game was. And so, from what I understood, it sounds like that we're going to be traveling both between the human world and the actual Digimon world. So we might be able to explore, the actual Digimon world, which really haven't been able to really do a lot necessarily. And there was like even moments in that trailer where you see a player riding a Garurumon and even like a Whalemon too. When they're like diving in the scene, like it's hard to see the player, but if you stop as soon as you see the Whalemon in the trailer and look, you see there's a player riding on top of Whalemon. So we might even have riding Digimon now too, to help explore the vast world of the Digimon world, which would
Yeah,
be really cool.
yeah. I just have to preface it, not to try to be like the pessimistic, negative Nancy. The game
If
has
it's
been
actually a thing.
the game has been in development for a while, and there's been rumors on the street that it was subject to development hell. So just prefacing it, I'm very hopeful that the game is good, and it looks like it's going to be something that I really want to play. I was into visual novels, so the fact that Survive was a visual novel didn't really bother me. But yeah, I'm just wearing my cautiously optimistic sleeve right now, so to
Yeah.
speak. But outside of video game news, we know that DigimonCon 2025 will be streamed on March 19th at 10 p.m. because it's Japan time, so they are obviously doing it in the morning for them. And the following is going to be on the docket for them. So they're going to be talking about the anime, which is going to be about Digimon Adventure Beyond. So they're going to give us a little bit of news for that. It's about time. We need a new anime, like desperately. I don't know why Bandai is not making more Digimon anime. They very easily could. But hey, we're getting something. Then we already mentioned game news wise, they're going to give us updates on Time Stranger, so hopefully they'll give us more than just the trailer and a little Q&A of some very basic stuff. I want a little bit more meat when it comes to that. Again, not going to be holding my breath because the last couple of Digimon cons have been just a ginormous waste of time. So I'm not even going to attempt to watch or live stream it because it's been a nothing burger for the past 3-4 years. Toy wise, we're going to be getting Godzilla versus Digimon. So I would have rather seen more Monster Hunter versus Digimon because Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out, and I think this would have been an absolutely perfect opportunity to again have a little cross promotion and have the Zinogre Garurumon and Rathalos Greymon make an appearance in Wilds. I think that would have been absolutely insane. That would have caused so much fanfare. It would have been unreal, and now is the time to strike and it's just a big missed opportunity. Instead, it's just not really vitality bracelet, but another VPET, and Godzilla versus Digimon's going to be another VPET. Card wise, we are going to be getting the latest on product information and news on project announcements. So I don't exactly know what that means outside of they're just going to be giving us updates on the card game, which they should. Everyone's waiting on the ban and restriction list. This is probably not going to be that announcement, but it's just going to be them selling us more Digimon cards and hopefully giving us some good news and probably a feature match, if I recall from past events. So it'll be interesting. Comic news. That's all it says. We're getting comic news. Music. There's going to be a special concert. There's always been. It's just Digimon music. It's good, but not really anything like noteworthy. And then goods. So they have Digimon Adventure 02 25th anniversary goods and latest good introduction. So they're going to just basically try to sell us more stuff through the medium of Digimon Con. So that is Digimon Con's like overarching developments. And speaking of developments, we do have the delay in Special Booster 2.5 for North America only. So essentially what this boils down to is we just lose the first week of pre-release because they extended pre-release to be 3 weeks long. So everywhere else it's going to be 3 weeks long, except for us it's going to be 2 weeks long. So we still technically get the set on time. We just lose 1 week of pre-release. So yeah, it just sucks. And they're not making up that week either. So, I mean, it's not like it's going to matter that much. It's just pre-release. But yeah, sets coming out at the end of February, beginning of March for 2.5. 2.5 is going to be really hype. Any other actual news, or is that basically it?
I think that's basically it for the most part.
Yeah. So tell us your thoughts about any of the news and developments down in the comments below or in the chat, because it's always interesting to hear what you all think. So with that, I guess we could actually just go to the main topic on building out what an EX or extra deck looks like for Digimon, because a lot of card games have it, and Digimon is reaching a new power pinnacle, and it's bound to happen eventually. It probably doesn't look like it's actually going to happen this year. I think like every block, they tend to design the entire year around a singular gimmick. We saw last year's was Ace Digimon. So like Ace Digimon really changed the game a lot on top of promos, but the promos were designed outside of sets, which is why promos tend to be absolutely broken. But regardless, each block they try to have like a pseudo gimmick to go with it, like an overarching theme that's going to be spread throughout the entirety of the year. So this could be something like Liberators, because Liberators was this year's theme, or I guess technically last year's theme. The year before that was Aces. Then the year before that, they were just kind of still finishing the foundations of the game. So we're entering like gimmick era, and it looks like we have a lot of like traits that they're playing around with, like Hero, Liberator, Chronicle, like the traits based on the series that they came from. So that's probably going to be the gimmick throughout 2025 and the 2025 competitive season. But
I mean, it could also be the Link too at the same time.
Right. Well, Link just seems more like a mechanic. It's not like they're gonna have Applemon spread out through every set like they did with Seekers cards, where it's just like,
True.
yeah, here's Seekers here, and here, and the decks are gonna be getting upgrades every other set, that type of thing. So, on top of new decks coming and forming, that tend to not get support. But regardless of that, usually they design around a singular gimmick that persists throughout the year and then maybe a little extra. So probably next year, again, not saying next year they're going to think about doing EX decks, but knowing Bandai and their card game history, EX decks is definitely something they are not afraid of doing. So if anyone's unfamiliar with EX decks, they're basically extra decks. It's like Yu-Gi-Oh's, they call it side deck, I think. It's similar to like the fusion deck or like whatever. Force of Will, if anyone's familiar with that, it's similar to what they have used with the Ruin mechanic, where it's the Ruin deck, or Rune deck, not Ruin, Rune. Magic kind of does it with certain cards being able to pull out of your sideboard. So Magic kind of does it as well. I don't know if Pokemon does it. Pokemon kind of doesn't really do it, but they have like Lost Box, but that's more Exile than side deck. But Dragon Ball is one of the more recent examples of Bandai game with the Zenkai deck. So there's just a couple of examples where they have a core idea around pulling outside resources from an outside pool of cards into the current state of the game. So that's what we're going to be kind of like theory crafting. So I know oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and to be fair, we have seen Digimon before do it in the past of side deck tournaments. I was at the Dallas regional like the very first time they had in-person events and everything, and the rules for that was, you could have 10 cards in the side deck, and obviously you couldn't go past the 4-card limit, and you still had to obey the ban and restrictions, so to say. But
well, that's side decking.
like, that was really
that's something completely different than like an extra deck. So like side decks. So I guess this is the big distinction where it's like side decks is something Digimon really doesn't want to do. And side decks is basically the ability to swap cards in between rounds of a match of Digimon. Most games like Magic kind of do this because they want counterplay to exist, where it's like, hey, this is a bad matchup. I'm not going to, like, give me some ability to fight that bad matchup. So that's where side decks come into play, but EX decks is literally basically just a second part. Like, think of it as an extension to your deck, where it's just like, yes, it's
like
not
the
inside
fusion,
of your
synchros,
deck.
and Xyz.
Yes, the easiest way is Yu-Gi-Oh! Think Fusion, Synchro, Xyz. Like, just an extra pool of cards that is technically part of your deck that is somewhere else that's not in your deck.
Okay.
So no side decks. It's not a side deck. That's why it's called extra deck, is because it is an extra part of your deck. EX deck for short.
Okay.
So the big thing is, how would Digimon go about doing this? So that's the big question. Is step number one is, based on the mechanics and rules that we have in place, how would Digimon even think about implementing this type of mechanic? Because it is going to be tied to a mechanic. So, like, again, going from Dragon Ball experience, they build up a secondary resource for guarding, essentially. So, like, they have the ability, like One Piece, to say, hey, during battle, I'm going to boost my card's attack so that way you can't delete it or remove it, or I'm going to ensure that my attack is going to be successful in hitting, and then one of those cards that you're using to combo with, that's what it's called in Dragon Ball, goes to the Zenkai resource, and then you pay for the Zenkai card with your Zenkai resource. So that's just how they're doing it, but that is, again, a mana-based game. So they have the liberties of doing it, where Digimon, because we're not an actual mana-based game, we have to think a little bit more creatively.
Okay. I don't know if, like, because I know Yu-Gi-Oh! How they do it. It's like, obviously with the fusions and whatnot. So it's like gotta obviously be a whole brand new thing, because the only real fusions that they have in Digimon is like DNA, and that's already kind of tied into the actual main deck so much that I can't see that being like DNA into its own side separate thing.
Yeah, like a
But
DNA deck. That would be interesting, a DNA deck. But I think, like, based on how our DNA mechanics work, that would be a little hard to do.
yeah, so I think it would have to be kind of something possibly because like I know and I don't play Magic, but don't they have something called commanders where it's like a boss you could just flip over at any moment or
Yeah,
something like that?
they have a command zone where it is an omnipresent card. It is one out of your 100 card deck that is always going to be available to you, and then you just basically pay the cost to be able to play the card like normal, and then when it gets removed, it goes back into the command zone. So, are you
No.
thinking like a singular Digimon that kind of acts as like a commander style thing, where if this Digimon
Yeah,
were to leave, then it goes to this special zone?
yeah. My idea of thinking is kind of like somewhat similar to like how Magic's commander is, and also like how Pokemon, excuse me, EX kind of works and everything. Like it could be a commander Digimon that you flip over, like say it's Boss Monster Alphamon or something like that for just random BS example. And you can't digivolve on top of it. You can't use it for X, Y, like tucking sources or anything like that kind of thing. Just to avoid any kind of OP protection or just OPness, because like it'd be really bad if you could just flip over an Alphamon at any moment and then just immediately DNA into Oryukin or something like that. But like it could just be this like one singular card that's on the field. It just like has a really good effect, and if it leaves the field or something, say you lose two security or something like that.
So the big question is one, how is the card getting out onto the field? And two, what kind of impact is it having on the field itself? So those are two big questions like you have to kind of think about because again, just using Dragon Ball as the Bandai example, with the Zenkai deck for Super is like you have three different style of cards. You have like battle cards, which are basically just souped up normal like cards. Then you have like your Z Zenkai evolution cards where it's just like on your leader you basically evolve into a plus version for either temporary or permanent amount of time. Don't quite remember because that's when I started quitting the game and I stopped playing was right when they introduced that. And then they have like the option effects where it's just like, yeah, this is just a super option. Where it's like it's a super spell essentially. Like all of the cards from the Zenkai deck are basically super something.
So what if it was like kind of like this, like in like the scenario of this? What if it was like something maybe of you can only bring it out on your opponent's turn, and it's when you have no security when they're like say swinging for game or something like that, and you could bring it out and you can't lose until your opponent removes that body of some kind. Maybe just
That immediately like screams Platinum Angel from Magic, and I'm just like, a lot of people don't like that card because like if they can't get rid of it, then they just don't lose the game, and that could be like that could lead to unfun situations where it's just like I had the game and then it's not even them having the out, it's that the extra card that you're proposing just automatically exists. So it's just like it just is it's incidentally extending the length of the game artificially, and that could be frustrating for players when they're just ready for it to be done.
okay, that's fair. Because
Because
like I
it'll
said, I'm not
put
familiar
control
with.
players in a huge advantageous position versus more aggressive players. Because let's just say I'm like Takumi Kazuchi OTK, I go to OTK you, and then I literally just have like it does solve the problem of like just being OTK'd out of nowhere. But at the same time, the cost could just be too high if specific decks aren't able to get rid of that type of a card. Because we're already seeing a huge issue with removing high level floodgates, and high level floodgates are extremely game warping at this current state of the game.
That. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, because like I was trying to think of like maybe a way of like because I wasn't familiar with like the whole commander thing with like Magic or anything. So like because like I said, I've never played Magic. Tried to learn it once and not interested. But the idea I was thinking was like kind of like doing the whole ace thing, but you weren't relying on having a body on the field because your opponent has so many ways of removing these bodies now, either Digi evolving so they no longer meet the level requirement, and just so on and so forth. And just like the idea was obviously just to stop your opponent from OT cane you on turn 2 or something like that. Just make your opponent be a little cautious, like, okay, do I have a way to answer this if I can't, swing for game right now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, but that's like what's making a card like Dynamon so good is because like, okay, I can answer it once, but I can't answer it twice. And most decks literally can't answer it twice, those types of cards, and that's like what makes those cards incredibly strong to begin with. Is like, oh yeah, my one time protection doesn't work because I could stop it for the turn, and then oh, you can't deal with it again. Cool, I guess it just sticks around, and then I just kind of win the game because you couldn't out it twice. Most decks don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah,
Um,
and I was also kind of like thinking too, like it would kind of make sense that the boss monster could just randomly appear too and everything, because like like in the Try movies and everything, I think it was the second one, like Alphamon just comes out of the blue, out of the nowhere, and then in the last Evolution movie, like you see like just all these Digimon like just randomly popping up out of nowhere and kind of like just shocking the other people around them, kind of thing was the idea I was thinking of, and I figured that might be the kind of tie-in lore of like how the mechanic works, because like a lot of the time the mechanics that the Digimon have made still resemble the original lore of some kind.
yeah, like an emergency card. I kind of get it, but I think those types of cards, like as we just learned with Battle Spirits, are also incredibly unhealthy because that's like remnants of their ice wall or something. I don't remember what it's called, but basically it's just a giant floodgate that just says no, you just can't do anything for the turn. And those are incredibly unfun to play against because again, going back to the super example, the meta that I left was literally floodgate hell, where it's just like, cool, you get one singular attack for the entire turn. My turn comes around, cool, I'm going to use the same type of card, and it just halts games to a crawl, and they're just not fun. Um, but I think like they're maybe not something that strong would be interesting to play around with. Again, this is all just conceptual. I know a lot of people come from or came from Vanguard, and they're a huge fan of like the ride line, but I think that warps deck design too much because the idea of the ride line is you just always have perfect curve, where it's just like, yeah, I'll always have the 3, the 4, the 5, and the 6 when I need it because that's just the ride line. I think like that could be kind of interesting where you can get that. So like it's not changing deck. It would change deck design. I'm not gonna lie. It would change deck design because then you'd be building around the fact that you have a ride line. But the idea behind it would just be increased consistency, which a lot of players would enjoy because it would reduce the amount of non-games, but it just makes the game more hyper consistent, and with consistency comes power. So that might not necessarily be the best unless like the ride line specifically is more underpowered than the Digimon in your deck, so that way they're more just curve fillers rather than I'm solely going to rely on this ride line to do everything I need to win the game. So like there would be a balance behind like taking that type of idea.
Yeah, because I think there was like a fan made rules or something that's somewhat kind of similar to that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but the thing is these would have to be specifically designed Digimon for this mechanic in mind because like it goes to one of my previous episodes where generic cards should not overshadow like archetypical cards. The whole idea behind generic versus archetype is generic can be used in a wider variety of things, but it's weaker than if you were just to run an archetype similar tool. So it's just like the example would be like, hey, I can play this one card kind of simple. We'll just use an Ukomon type design. It's an on play dig 3 for any Digimon. Um, Versus like, hey, I'm going to have an in archetype version where it allows me to dig 5 and take 2. So that would be a more specific example of the in archetype version would be designed stronger so that way people are more prone to use it versus the generic one that should be weaker. So that goes into like design philosophies on how to not make cards kind of just Gallantmon, medieval Gallantmon levels of stupid. Where it's just like, yeah, let's just run it in everything because it's the best card in the entire game. So there's no reason not to. Um, yeah, and Death X followed that similar design philosophy for a while, which is why like a lot of people have problems with those types of cards, is because generic is overshadowing um, archetypical when it should be the other way around. But this is getting a little bit too off topic, and I think like those types of cards, like whatever the EX kind of pool is going to be doing, it has to be weaker than what your deck would natively be doing for the way that Digimon is designed, at least in my perspective. Like you can have archetypical like EX style cards where it's just like, okay, yeah, crank the power level up because it does have more restrictions to it. But again, it just depends on what we actually settle on or what Digimon would settle on for what an EX style deck would look like. Because again, each game kind of does it a little bit differently. So going to another example of like Force of Will, they basically had a card that said you're only allowed to run this amount of runes. God, why I hate the English language. But basically in Force Will, they had attached to your leader the ability to run a specific amount of runes to be able to say, hey, I could run a max of 5 runes for this leader, and these runes are basically the replacements to my leader's effect. They could do something similar with egg decks for like the Yggdrasil type design stuff, where it's like, yeah, I have the solitary deck or egg that's just engineering the deck, and then you could have these like, I'll just still call them runes, to be able to do different effects based on the different scenarios that you're put in or what you want your deck to actually be able to do. So I think like there's some interesting room for non-stack based design to implement an EX style deck.
Yeah, I think even another, like, I'm not sure if maybe this would be something too, was there were some people that were talking about like, I can't remember for sure who exactly, but there was like people who were wanting to see maybe like field spells of like something similar like to Yu-Gi-Oh from field spells and everything, but like maybe it could just be kind of like just be really generic, like you could just kind of flip over at any point and go, oh, all my red Digimon get plus 2,000, or maybe a yellow field spell where it's like, oh, when my yellow Digimon attacks, then you lose minus 2k in your security or something like that. Just nothing too broken, but something that kind of relatively keeps it like a low power, what the deck color wants to do kind of thing.
So, I guess my counter argument is because most people are thinking that's coming from the main deck. If it's coming from outside of the deck to be able to achieve a field effect, like what would you be doing to be able to get that card out? So that's always going to be the big thing when it comes to these types of designs is what are you actually doing to get this card or ability or whatever off. So it's just like, okay, I'm sacrificing basically my raising area to be able, like going back to the Force of Will, like Ruin example, it's just like I'm sacrificing my eggs to run a toolbox of either Digimon or options that I'm going to be hard playing instead to try to make up for the loss of this type of thing. Like there generally has to be like a give and take to it. So like if we were to have basically just a singular field spell, in a sense, what would you be doing to actually get that on the field?
I mean, I feel like it would just kind of have to be like just maybe trashing the top card of your egg stack, I guess, or something like that, potentially.
I feel like that's too easy though. Like most
Yeah,
people would just abuse it with Ukamon, where it's just like, yeah, Ukamon, raise out, hatch an egg, pop the egg, play the field, and then now your Ukamon is potentially more powerful. Like, I guess the point that I'm kind of like trying to get at is like EX decks, no matter what you do, are always going to be hyper problematic because it's just guaranteed free resource, or not really free resource, it's just guaranteed cards that generally have very low conditions to meet in order to get out. And because it's always in a separate pool of cards, the consistency on being able to use them is usually incredibly high. So I would think like that type of an ability would be like I would need to invest something greater into for the output to be worth it, I guess. Or like not game breaking. So,
yeah,
going to another example, this is probably my favorite because it is the closest one that we have to actual Digimon, and that is looking at the good old Chrono of Clash. So, if anyone's unfamiliar with Chrono Clash, it was the predecessor to Digimon. It died for Digimon. Um, Richard, not Richard Garfield. The original designer helped start the initial designs with Digimon with Chrono Clash, and they have an EX, like an actual extra deck. And what they do is, in order to play an EX card, you have to sacrifice a card on your field or cards on your field to equal the total cost of the card that you're trying to play out. So, like, their example is, hey, this EX card costs 6. So I need to get rid of 6 cost worth of cards on my field in order to play out this EX card. So that already is built into how the memory gauge kind of works because you already put the overall investment in. The only issue that I see with that type of mechanic, well, they do it a little bit differently than a lot of other games. Like, you have to actually waste a card draw from your deck, I believe, in order to draw an EX card out of your deck, and your EX deck is shuffled. So that's already a little bit of a give and take on trying to balance how that works, because Digimon and Chrono Clash towards the end, we have just a lot of playing shit for free. Pardon my language, but there's no way to sugarcoat it. We just can spit out bodies on bodies with effects, and that could ruin the balance of EX cards. So that might not actually work, but that is a potential method that we have to be able to get something like this to be able to work. And I think like the way that you have to sacrifice a card draw from your deck for a card draw for your EX deck, or have specific effects that trigger drawing from your EX deck, that would be something interesting. Because the
I mean,
EX cards are stronger than your average card, because they're extra cards.
I'm not familiar with what'd you say that game was again?
Chrono Clash.
Chrono.
Yeah, it's Chrono Clash. It's basically like it was Bandai's mixed IP game before Union Arena. So like the first set was Naruto, the second set was Godzilla, the third set was Evangelion. Because Ava's just the cheapest IP in the world to get, because that's all the before Gainax went bankrupt, that's all Gainax actually did was just sell the Ava IP to be able to make any kind of money. Then they also had a My Hero set. So like it was just mixed IP the game.
Yeah, because like I'm not quite familiar with that Chronos thing, so I mean,
Most people aren't.
like
I
giving
don't
up a
blame
draw.
anyone.
Yeah, because like the only thing that like the idea of like a Digimon player losing a draw, it's like we kind of draw when we Digivolve, so it's like you could kind of get away with doing it if you have like, say you're, oh, if I got a level 4, like if I already have what I need, like my entire evolution line in hand, like level 4, 5, and 6, then I don't need to worry about drawing my next card, so to say, because I'll probably draw whatever I wanted to from just Digivolving itself.
Yeah, I think like if that were to work for Digimon, we definitely would need a more specific draw. So basically, we would need to have it like an EX draw. Where it's like this is an effect that is allowing you to access your EX deck. And then your EX deck could be shuffled and randomized, so that way it doesn't feel overbearing and overpowerful because of just the sheer insanity that it could be held inside of the EX deck. But kind of like what you were saying, it's just like, yeah, I think like because Digimon draws a lot, it would definitely be something to kind of balance around where it's just like we can't just say, hey, I'm just going to replace my normal draw with an EX draw. I think that's where you need to have an effect to EX draw.
Yeah, because like if let alone like the whole EX drawing, then players might even just do it like, oh, I'm about to deck out. If I can't draw for turn, well, I guess I'll just go ahead and EX draw then. I
Yeah, I
mean, that
think
would
like the EX, like if we were to do that, the EX draws cards would kind of have to be really bad to compensate for how good the EX cards could be. And that's assuming that we're using EX cards either A as normal or B like Chrono Clash where we have to sacrifice cards on our field in order to actually play the EX card. Which I think like for where the game is, that kind of would have kind of what you were saying earlier, the interesting dynamic where it's just like, okay, I can't be de-digivolved and but I can be stun locked. So like it does have its own like levels of intricacy in terms of counterplay.
are you talking about the whole idea of Digimon quote unquote commander idea I was talking about?
Well, it's combining it where it's just like, okay, EX cards can only be hard played, but to hard play them, you have to sacrifice cards on your field. And then because of that, they can't just be simply de-digivolved or whatnot. Like, you have to have some alternative means. Basically, like, soft removal wouldn't work, and you would have to rely on hard removal to get rid of them. So it's like those types of cards can't necessarily have like Magnamon X Antibody BT16 level of protection. And then they obviously can't have effects like Fortitude or whatnot. Because then you just try to find a way to give it a source and whatnot. But I think like that might be still like finding ways to give it a source would be kind of interesting. Even though that might be opening you up to be weak, it would allow for more interesting cards to be played in anything but blue, because blue can just add sources basically for free anyway.
Well, yeah, that was where the idea I was thinking of was like you can't digivolve on top of them, you can't add sources underneath and everything. Because
Yeah.
like the idea with like Alphamon is, oh, you can easily tuck sources with Yuji under it to give it more additional effects to make that Alphamon commander quote unquote thing more busted. So that was the idea I was thinking.
Yeah, but obviously, like if we slash Bandai were to implement that type of a card, it obviously can't be medieval gallant level of stupid. Like
Yeah, no.
there definitely needs to be checks and balances with what they can do. But I think like combining some of the ideas that we have could lead to some interesting developments, because then you could have cards that require specific Digimon to sacrifice to archetype lock them, so that way you can't just, you know, spit out a medieval Gallantmon for sacrificing one Digimon on your field, trigger all. I think the other thing is, if we do go the sacrificial route, we can't trigger on delete effects. Like, it doesn't delete the Digimon, it puts them into the trash. Like, we would have to have wording and stipulation to not trigger on delete, because then it would just make purple decks too strong. So like there is a lot of work that would have to go into it if that's the approach that they want to take. Otherwise, it could just be like, oh hey, this is just a Digimon that you could still Digivolve with, but it's not, like, I don't know. I think it's just like normal cards kind of just don't really feel very interesting or spicy in terms of like, yeah, I'm just gonna EX draw and then Digivolve into basically a normal Digimon. Like, it doesn't feel spicy. So they would
Yeah.
have to do something different that we haven't really seen or explored that much. But still, like, not have the possibilities of, like, oh, I'm just gonna play EX Mega Zoo, where it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna get up into my EX Digimon and then just get up into my normal Digimon and then just EX 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 turn after turn after turn. I think that would also be pretty problematic and unhealthy, which is why, like, at least in Chrono Clash, you have to sacrifice cards of value to get there. And I, for Digimon, tokens wouldn't count towards anything, and it would have to be play cost based and not DP based.
Yeah.
So that's an example of that on how using the best example with Chrono Clash would be able to yield some interesting results. Um, I'm trying to think, like, what other games have extra decks that I've, like, played and enjoyed.
Trying to think
Because
that I don't think there's really that much. I mean, I know there is technically the idea that I'm trying to think like Vanguard, like when they did their first reboot of the game, they had like something where like once you got into the ride threes, I think yeah they were ride threes. Like you had like depending on what your deck's archetype is, whether it was like the Force, the Excel, or even that trying to remember
yeah, the
like
markers
I'm
or
not
whatever.
yeah, like they were markers. Like you could put them on the zones and everything, and it's like, oh, if you have anything that's on that zone, then they get additional effects and everything.
Yeah, the most broken one was obviously getting the extra unit out, but um Vanguard aside, yeah, like something like that could be interesting where it's just like you can have one of those style, like maybe that's how you achieve field effects essentially. Like meet a particular condition to be able to get the field effect off. Like going backwards in ideas, I guess.
Yeah,
Because
and like
obviously the
maybe like
magic route is not good, proven to be problematic. Where it's just like, yeah, I just literally can pull from these with specific cards, and then it's literally just a Swiss Army knife on being able to fix bad matchups. But they are normal cards. But those normal
yeah,
cards are meant to be actually swapped mid game, not during game.
yeah, and I know like sorry, excuse me, like maybe what they could even try to do is like make the cards like kind of archetype theme of some kind. Like what I mean by that is like I'm trying to remember. There's like a continuous spell card in Yu-Gi-Oh where it's like, oh, if your graveyard is all the same trait and your monsters on the field get 800 attack, so maybe they could have like effects similar to that. It's like, oh, if you have all dinosaur trait, then you get this effect, or if you have all aquatic, then you get this effect, or something like that.
I think that would probably go to the conditions in order to play the card. So it's just like, attach it to like a level 6 and be like, when digivolving, if this condition is met, then you're able to play this, like then you're able to play a card from your EX deck or whatever it actually is going to end up being. um
Yeah, the way I was thinking that was like, it's so that way you can't use like engines to get into the level 6, like the Dusk and Dawn engine or the Cerberus engine for the Leviathan. Like, just have a completely different top end that probably shouldn't go with that deck to begin with.
right, it would de-incentivize engine use because then you're missing out on this potential powerful card, whatever it may be. Because it could just be like, hey, it could be a free Evo, it could be a field effect, it could be some powerful delay option. Like there's a lot that it could end up being. It doesn't matter what it is. Just some conditions met to where it makes it difficult to use, but still reasonable enough to where it could be actually played.
Yeah, and it's like, or even just like something to where I'm trying to think because like sorry, I'm drawing a blank like because I know in Yu-Gi-Oh like I'm trying to remember I think it's like I can't remember what it's called. Like, but like the whole continuous spell card I was talking about, like it's like so long as your graveyard is all the same archetype, then your monsters on the field get another attack. So the moment you put something different that's not that same archetype in there, you lose that effect. Like maybe you could just even have something as simple as that. Like if the moment your trash has something that's not this like Digimon that is dark animal, then you just don't get any of the continuous effects or something like that.
Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of avenues for that because I do think that would also help check specific, not only just specific engines, but like that type of design could help check like grave hate because right now we just don't really have a whole lot of grave hate. And like the game is in desperate need of some more, so that also could be used like as an avenue to design around um like, hey, I get a benefit for you not being archetype locked. And I think that would cause for interesting meta dynamic. But I think like saving that for an EX card would be more reasonable because that way you could put the restriction on both players to where it's just like, yeah, I want to build my deck in this particular way, but I also want to punish you for building your deck in not the designed intended way. Um, so I think there's that's an interesting idea. It doesn't always like have to be a field spell or whatever kind of. Like I think just relying too much on field spells is kind of like a crutch. And like I get we have like the nature stuff where it's just like, oh yeah, the families you just have an option that throws in and then all of your cards of that trait gain this benefit. But most of the time the benefit isn't incredibly strong. It's impactful enough because of the unique ways you could use the card. But maybe EX cards could even take that type of approach where it basically would act kind of like the family spells where it's like, yeah, so you get to play a card, EX draw, then the EX cards can be like basically almost bases. Like that's kind of where what I'm thinking is like maybe the EX cards could act as bases for Digimon. So if anyone's unfamiliar with what bases are, Gundam is the new Bandai card game that's coming out. They have an additional layer of protection to their security in the form of bases, where you have to defeat the base in order to start hitting the security, and a base could also come out of your security. So maybe EX cards could be the bases where we EX draw and then we get to play essentially this base. The base will have a passive benefit for our field, but can still be removed and interacted with. So maybe
Yeah, because like
that's an interesting way to do it.
yeah, because if I remember correctly, the bases practically go in the Gundam TCG's quote unquote security, so the player has to still get like the player can still get rid of like the base, so to say, or the extra layer protection and whatever. Like there's still ways for the opponent to interact with it.
Yeah. No, I that's kind of an interesting idea. Like there's so much untapped potential with not only just EX cards or like an EX deck, but just various other mechanics that could be borrowed from other TCGs that I think like could be leveraged in some unique and interesting ways. And EX
Yeah, because like
cards is just like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because it's a thing a lot of other TCGs do, but I haven't played a whole lot of TCGs that actually use extra decks outside of like the examples we've been using.
yeah, because like I know Bandai just only recently has now kind of started playing with like Digimon's security, like with the Royal Base deck, the new option, what face up things, whatever you want to call them, and everything, and even
Yeah.
the invisible one. Like they're like coming up with new ways to have like give security like more other effects, like more uses for the game and everything. So I mean, maybe there's just and like what was it, BT13, we kind of saw a whole new way of using the egg or the breeding area, like with Jaeger Seal and even with the Seven Great Demon Lords. So,
Well, technically,
like,
Mother did that first. Mother was the initial
Mother did, yeah.
design.
Yeah, Mother did first, but
But it led
it's
to,
just
I get what you're saying. It led to different deck styles and different ways to approach and play the game.
yeah. So like there could easily just be something we're not thinking about, like of how they could just change of how something gets used or something. And we're just not thinking what it could be, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of different ways to approach this type of design. It's just literally whatever Bandai would feel like would best benefit the game to be not just purely overbearing, but like a natural progression. So like they could just do like a Pokemon style of thing where it could literally just be a singular card that you could just digivolve, like a singular mega that you're able to digivolve into at any time. But when that mega leaves the field, similar to like Aces and Overflow, something detrimental can happen because Pokemon with like VMAX and their EX Pokemon, even though they don't come from an EX deck, um, just the idea of big reward, big punishment is something that that type of design can leverage. And it doesn't even have to be super overbearing either, depending on how it is. It's just like, yeah. So you could, like, they could even introduce, like, EX Digivolving, where it's just like I could Digivolve from my EX deck, and then when my EX Digimon leaves the field, um, then similarly to Overflow, like, hey, lose two security or give the opponent. I hate just give the opponent more memory. I think that's dumb and boring and lazy at this point. Um, but like give the opponent like a token or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know about the whole token thing, but I could definitely see like
Like just
the
lose security. Like on like when it's
or
removed
what if it's
overflow, remove like -2 security.
or what if it's like when this Digimon gets removed from the field, you trash so many cards in your hand and can't activate when trash effects or something like that.
Ooh, that's even more spicy. Just be like lock yourself out of specific actions if this card is removed. I think that's incredibly spicy. It's just like, yeah, your when digivolving abilities won't activate for the next turn. Like it doesn't even have to be like as simple as remove security. That's just an easy one. But
Yeah,
like
because like some decks don't even care about the security, like they can mill you out, or you could just bring it out when you have no security, kind of like the how the Agubon and the Gabubon from BT6. Like, oh, I don't care if I don't have any security because I'm either winning the game or I didn't have security to begin with, kind of
right.
thing.
Like it's leveraging that level of design but implementing it a little bit differently. I do think like your Digimon can't use on plays or when Digivolves, basically locking them out of effects. That would be a very fun punishment. Um, but obviously the card is going to try to be as strong as like what Ace Digimon can be because like the EX evolution could, I hate it being free. I think it should have a cost. And the cost shouldn't be backloaded, but regardless, it's obviously
Yeah,
just
the
a
only
fake mechanic that's not in the game. So we're just spitballing ideas here.
yeah, because I mean it should not be a free evolution because the advantage of getting it is like, oh, I don't have to draw into a level 6. I have a level 6 ready to go at any point I need, kind of thing. Like kind of the whole idea of the commander thing of flipping over your boss whenever kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, it could be literally just a singular Digimon. It could be a deck of random Digimon, like up to 5 or something. There's so many different, I guess there's not that many different ways, but there's a couple of decent and reasonable approaches in order to I honestly like the idea of like 5 Digimon, like 5 EX Digimon that get shuffled into an EX deck, and when you EX Digivolve, it's at random. So that way it adds a. And you can only have one EX Digimon in your deck. Like you can't just say, hey, I'm going to have 4 of the good one and 1 of the bad one, similar to eggs. I think forcing only one like allows for that randomness to exist. And I
Well,
think like randomness in TCGs, yes, it does feel bad, but you do need some extra elements of controlled RNG to make games feel more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I have with that is like if like why five? Because like if it's removed, I mean, are you really going to go through five of the entire game kind of thing? Like maybe it could just even be three, especially since they can only be one ofs in the deck.
I think five
Or
just increases the randomness, and like it still is kind of thematic with it matches the amount of eggs, so that way you're still not like it's just more randomness essentially. It gives you more opportunities to have more different Digimon too, as like the catch 22 to it. So like yes, it's more random, but you could have it's offset by you could have more than one or not more than one. Like you have more of a selection to toolbox it with. Um but ooh, even the okay, so hear me out. Um I think a cost to that for X like EX digivolving, if we were to go that route, I think bottom decking one of your tamers, like as a condition to be able to X digivolve. Or like EX digivolve. So that way you're still
kind of
kind
like
of losing
Digiburst
some.
in a way.
Yeah, kind of like Digiburst. Where it's except instead of it going to your hand ready to be reused, it goes to the bottom of the deck, so that way you technically lose access to it. And because it's going to the bottom of the deck, you can't just grab it out of your trash if you decide like, oh, it should just be deleted instead. Like, no, purple would then abuse it. Like, there's so many, like, the interesting thing is there's so many different factors that we have to take into account when coming up with new concepts like this because of just, I guess, the sheer imbalance. It's not really an imbalance. It's just
How can something from an older set abuse it?
right, like just dancing around the current design framework of the game is essentially the best way I can describe it. Um, but I think that's kind of neat, where it's just like you could X Digivolve for a reduced cost, and then you could reduce the cost by bottom decking a tamer. So if you wanted to not bottom deck a tamer, you could just pay the full, kind of like burst digivolving. But if you want to, and like obviously these have to have high digivolution costs and be relatively powerful cards if we were to do that. But then like, do we need the overflow esque effect of the downside? I don't know. Again, that's something that would need like more design work rather than just quick spitballing ideas.
Well, here's the other question: would you be able to digivolve on your opponent's turn, like mid interrupt them or
No,
anything like that?
no. I think like if you were to do like EX Digivolutions, it would have to be.
On
I
your
think
turn solely.
yeah, it has to be on your turn solely, and it has to have some sort of cost to it. On top of that, because it is just supposedly a very powerful thing. Obviously, with the EX deck being shuffled and randomized, you're not guaranteed to get what you want, but it still should put you into a good position. Obviously, this would change level 6 designs because now you basically don't need to run any level 6s in your deck. So there's some balancing to that. But I guess not every Digimon would have the ability to X Digivolve or like EX Digivolve. Um, so
Well,
there's a lot of work that still would have to go into fleshing out that mechanic based on how we're currently playing the game. Because can I X Digivolve off of like the scrambles or the trainings or whatever, and then if I don't want that to happen, how do I word the ability to not be used in tandem with those effects?
well, here's another thing too, like because not every deck uses like tamer, so to say. So like, what about the idea since digivolving, like there's like Digimon has like the most drawing of cards and everything, and like you can easily build up a hand of like 8 to 10 cards or something like that.
I think
Like
ditching
what?
hand cards is bad. Like that's so as a Mirage
Well,
player, like because Digimon draws so many cards, like telling your opponent to get rid of cards is literally the equivalent of do nothing. Like it is honestly just that bad, and that's why like Barbermon and Ravemon have never been good, is because the opponent could just have too many cards in their hands to where it's just like, yeah, okay, I could face the
Well, no,
negative
no, no, no.
consequences.
What I'm saying, like the whole idea of bottom deck and a tamer and everything. What if instead, like you have to not trash cards from your hand, place 2 cards from your hand into your trash, so therefore you don't activate wind trash and effects in order to EX evolve.
That's still the equivalent of not paying a cost, because you could just like, again, because of how high the level of card draw in Digimon is compared to your average game, losing 2 cards usually, especially if you're choosing the 2 cards, usually amounts to, this is basically a free action. Like discard just does not matter in Digimon 9 out of 10 times. Like again, that's why Ravemon and Barbermon will never be good, is because like, oh, you force the opponent to get rid of 1 card. That literally does, that's the equivalent of doing nothing. Like that actually is the equivalent of doing nothing. So telling the opponent to, or telling yourself to remove cards out of your hand to get this effect usually equates to it being free. Like it's not free, but it might as well be free. That's my only caveat on that, is like, it's not a good counterbalance. Especially putting it into the trash. That's also not good counterbalancing, because then you could just grab it back out whenever you want, especially for purple.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, no, there's still like, obviously these are just rapid fire ideas and nothing super concrete. Because we don't know what Digimon's actually going to do, if they're actually going to implement it. It's always interesting to think of what could be a possibility based on a concept that others have already used. So I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up, because I'm running out of ideas, because I don't have, I have a good deep game repertoire to dig down, but it's not that deep to where I have like 1.5 million examples. So, do you have any closing thoughts or statements on like, if, like, obviously I don't think an EX deck would be healthy for the game. I very much obviously don't, because as other games have taught us, these extra decks are, one, incredibly powerful, and two, borderline game breaking and game warping. That's why, like, again, Magic example, Companion had to be completely reworked, is because it was fundamentally broken, because you basically started with an extra card in your hand, and that's all these EX decks essentially are, is just extra cards to be able to play with for very little usual resource investment in them. Um, which is why most of the time they're problematic. Um, but yeah, I think it's something Bandai, I can see Bandai doing, but I don't know how Bandai would do it at the end of the day. So
Yeah,
any closing statements?
yeah. There's like not one I could think of off the top of my head. I mean, there is but I doubt they would, but I mean, I we do know they are coming out with like these whole link things. We still don't know how exactly they're working that and
Well,
everything,
they're
but
kind of working like Digicross, where it's just like you have to have linked Digimon, I think, on your field, and then you just pay the link cost, and then one gets tucked underneath, and then gives the other one a power boost. It's basically the same thing as Digicross, just worded a little bit differently.
right. But what I mean is like like we haven't seen like the actual link boss monster. That's what I mean.
Oh, it's
So
gonna be Gaiamon, 100%. Like, because right now they're just focusing on the gotcha stuff and some preliminary cards. But because they're focusing on Gachamon and he's the protagonist, it's gonna be Gaiamon. We don't know what Gaiamon's gonna do, but it's gonna be Gaiamon.
well, yeah, and like we haven't even seen its car. So like I don't know if maybe they could have used like the whole link thing as the new EX kind of deck idea thing, brainstorming idea. maybe.
Like a link. I don't necessarily think that works based on how the mechanic is currently designed.
Yeah, because like it just feels like to me like links just sounds like a oh it is just another uh Digi-Cross just reworded kind of thing. So it's like not making it seem unique.
I mean, it doesn't have to be fair. Like, a lot of our new keywords are basically just plussed versions of keywords we already have.
Oh yeah, that is true.
Like, they've already effectively replaced blocker twice. And if they really wanted to, because like you have the redirectors, which are not blockers, but they are blockers, but they don't block, they redirect. And then you have cards like Dynamon, which they, if they really wanted to, again going from Chrono Clash, they could convert his ability to literally just the keyword Sentinel, like because that's what the mechanic is from Chrono Clash. It's Sentinel. It's if my Digimon is suspended, you have to attack into it before my security. Like that's literally Sentinel from Chrono Clash. So they could easily make that its own keyword for Digimon going forward, and now they've effectively replaced blocker twice. So like replacement mechanics that functionally work similar to the old ones is nothing new. Because that's what Fragment is from Digiburst, because they're pretty similar, and they would work in similar styles of design space. So, I don't know. It's it's all just fun food for thought at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're gonna be skipping spoilers this week. We very much easily could go over them, but I guess like tell us if you actually care or want to hear spoilers on the podcast. I know like I ran a poll before, like a long time ago when the game was actually first new. And I was in the spoiler race with Ross. Or Wazi plays. He gave up on Digimon because he just is a card game of the week kind of a guy. Let me go to the newest hotness thing, try to get as many views as possible, and then abandon it. I'm not huge on those types of people, but I lost the spoiler war with him. He knew absolutely nothing about Digimon and was misinterpreting the cards horribly. And I lost to that, which was unfortunate, but it seemed like people just didn't care about spoilers, so tell us if you actually want to hear our thoughts about the spoilers down in the comments below. But I think if that's everything, we can just wrap it up here. So thank you all for listening all the way to the end. It really does mean the world to us. Gosh, we're 93 episodes in, and that's a pretty good feat. We're almost at the 100 mark. So thank you all for listening and continue to listen. And with that, hopefully we will catch you all in the next episode. Later.